This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
In 11 or 12 years of writing, Mike, I can lay claim to at least this. I have never written beneath myself. I've never written anything that I didn't want my name attached to. I have probed deeper in some scripts, and I've been more successful in some than others. But all of them that have been on, you know, I'll take my lick. They're mine, and that's the way I wanted them. Somebody asked me the other day if this means that I'm going to be a meek conformist, and my answer is no. I'm just acting the role of a tired nonconformist. I don't want to have to battle sponsors and agencies. I don't want to have to push for something that I want and have to settle for second best. I don't want to have to compromise all the time, which in essence is what the television writer does if he wants to put on controversial themes.
Well, then why do you stay in television?
I stay in television because I think it's very possible to perform a function of providing adult, meaningful, exciting, challenging drama without dealing in controversy necessarily. This, of course, Mike, is not the best of all possible worlds. I am not suggesting that this is at the absolute millennium. I think it's criminal that we're not permitted to make dramatic note of social evils as they exist, of controversial themes as they are inherent in our society. I think it's ridiculous that drama, which by its very nature should make a comment on those things that affect our daily lives, is in the position, at least in terms of television drama, of not being able to take this stand.
Welcome everyone to the Holodeck. This is our adventure through things that are non-Trek that have interest us in other parts of media, mostly television. But for this edition, we've decided to explore the Twilight Zone. Now, we've recorded a few episodes already, and I think thoroughly we can say we're actually really enjoying the series. For some of us, it's our first time watching. For myself, personally, I know Stars, you've not watched it a lot. For Dan, Auto, you are Twilight Zone veterans in the field, re-exploring a classic of your younger days, maybe. However, we thought we'd spend a bit of time actually talking about the creator, Rod Serling himself, and not as wide known. We're Star Trek fans, so we know, the legacy of Gene Roddenberry. Obviously, you've got George Lucas for Star Wars, James Cameron for Avatar. The big sort of names that are developing these worlds. But Rod Serling, I feel, it kind of has been missed from. At least from in Britain, it's not a familiar name. Maybe more so in America. You guys can talk more about that. But also talk to us a bit about Rod Serling a little bit, and sort of how he came to be in the creator of the Twilight Zone. How he came to be a bit of a influencer in the social zeitgeist.
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything about Rod. Rod's going to tell you about Rod. I'm going to do a digital Ouija board.
Ooh.
And channel Rod. So anytime I talk in this video is going to be a direct quote from Rod Serling, which you can choose to engage with or not engage with. And I'll start with this one. If you write, fix pipes, grade papers, lay bricks, or drive a taxi, do it with a sense of pride. And do it because, do it the best you know how. Be cognizant and sympathetic to the guy alongside because he wants a place in the sun too. And always, always look past his color, his creed, his religion, and the shape of his ears. Look for the whole person. Judge him as a whole person.
Mr. Rod, message from the reporter here. Can you speak to us why you created the Twilight Zone and what brought you to this monumental moment and landmark TV series in entertainment history?
That's a great segue. I think it's very possible to perform the function of providing adult, meaningful, exciting, challenging drama without dealing in controversy. I think it's criminal that we're not allowed to make dramatic note of social evils as they exist. I think it's ridiculous that drama, which by its nature should make a comment on those things that affect our daily lives, is in the position of not being able to take these stands.
All right. Dan, as the person who can't read the teleprompter, please talk to me a bit about Serling, like where you first sort of came with the Twilight Zone, your interactions with sort of his philosophy and that sort of thing.
I watched an awful lot of garbage growing up. There are very few individual episodes of TV that I can remember from my childhood. There's a few that stick out for their sheer lunacy, like a couple of stray episodes of I Love Lucy. Certainly, what's brought us all together initially was some episodes of Star Trek, the original series that was in syndication, and then as I was growing up, The Next Generation. strangely enough, Batman the animated series.
Quality television.
But I mean, maybe not so strangely, it's a masterpiece. But really, what stuck out to me and what I kept coming back to, maybe curiosity or maybe because of the quality of the content, has been the Twilight Zone. So growing up, I remember watching initially just a few random episodes on Nick at Night, and then there was a few annual New Year's Eve countdowns I think that they did that I would watch with my mom, and we'd relive these episodes. For her, I think that she even was still too young to watch and appreciate them back when they were being released, but they've lived on in syndication perennially. And so it's something that's stuck with me. And so the ability to revisit has really unlocked a different type of curiosity for me, more than just the need to see what the resolution of the episode was, but the need to unpack not only what they were about, but why they were written. And I think that's what has kind of drawn us all together.
Go on, Stars. What have you gained of Rod Serling in? Because as I say, this is the first time you've watched these as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of those things where like Twilight Zone is obviously such a massive like cultural artifact. Like you cannot avoid if you are at all interested in science fiction, in speculative fiction, in guess what? If you've enjoyed a animated cartoon in the last 30 years, chances are they've done a pastiche of at least 2 or 3 Twilight Zone episodes. I know since has done like pretty much every one of them at some point. But there really is just something special about getting to go back and appreciate it in its own right and give it its own time to just breathe. Because the instant you do, it just grabs you by the scruff of your neck, pulls you in, and says, "You're going to learn something now, you little shit." And I just there's just such a I watched the interview that Auto put up, and it's like Rod Serling comes across as a man who is very much in love. He seems very down on himself, which is a very creative thing to do. He says of himself, I went out fighting as most television writers do in regards to fighting over censorship. And he mentioned, the battle of the writer to be his own man. I think the interviewer Mike Wallace was talking about, and it's like there's obviously a massive struggle within him of, I have a lot of things I want to say that I have been thinking about since he was a war veteran, obviously, and that appears to have massively influenced his writing, obviously. And what he's allowed to say, like, there's a massive conversation about pre-censorship, which is I know for a fact this is never going to get through, so I'm not going to bother writing about it. To actual censorship, which is you need to change this line, that line, and this line. And he's just such a incredibly well-spoken and intelligent man. And he refers to himself as a tired nonconformist, and I can't think of anything that sums him up better. Especially because I did a little bit of digging into his background, and I don't know if you guys came across it. Do you know what the motto of his university was?
Please.
The motto of Antioch University, where he did his education, was "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity."
Ooh.
And I feel like Rod must have read that and internalized that.
Yeah.
Because good God, does it come through in every episode of these things we watched. Like there's just such a fascinating conversation he has with the interviewer in that thing, where it's all about. He strikes me as someone who is just so incredibly fascinated by television as a art form, as a mouthpiece, as a conversation. He's constantly talking about his contemporaries, about people who have thrown out incredible projects and then gotten shot down because they couldn't deal with the struggle between commerciality and ideas. He just seems like a man who's very interested in talking about media, and I like that. He's very reflective about what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do. And there's this great moment where like because he has this whole I'm going on a whole diatribe here, but I just love this interview. It's just I love talking about this. Because Rod is so insistent that Twilight Zone has no. I'm not going to dive into current social problems thematically. No, I'm not. Fucking liar. And Mike Rawless asked him, "Oh, are you writing pot boilers?" Which is, I was like, well, that's a really weird term. What is a pot boiler? And a pot boiler is a book, film, or other creative work produced solely to make the originator a living by catering to popular taste. And I feel like that must be a concept that tickles Serling, because it's like he I don't think he's capable of writing a pot boiler if he tried. He's just such he's such a fascinating individual. I could talk about him all day, but I'm taking the conversation already.
Mr. Serling, what do you have to say about you breaking into television?
Fame is short-lived. 1 year after this show goes off the air, they'll never remember who I am, and I don't care a bit. Anonymity is fine with me. My place is as a writer.
So just going a bit into his past, he was born and raised in America, was interested in writing plays and things at an early age, but actually got involved, as most people they did in that time of year, at the time of the century, got involved in the war, in the World War II. But was very heavily involved in various regiments, and got some accolades and awards. World War II victory.
Well, do you
medal.
See his medal list?
Yeah, as well.
It's
Exactly.
got,
He got the
10
Purple
rows.
Heart. He got the Bronze Star. The Philippine Liberation Medal, the parachute. Tons of stuff. Like, he was very well awarded. He was a good serviceman for his understate his service to his country and to the literary arts as well. Was very to be well commended. But after the war, moved into radio and into television before eventually settling and working on the Twilight Zone. But it's definitely, you can definitely see the parallels between what he learned during the war and bringing it through into the Twilight Zone. Especially some of the episodes we've looked at, like Eye of the Beholder, and it's been the one we just watched as well, The Obsolete Man, and things like that. There is definite themes of humanity running through, and it's very refreshing because we are massive Star Trek fans. We've done a Star Trek series for a long time. We cannot invariably stop but compare him to Gene Roddenberry, and we feel so bad because Gene Roddenberry can't hold a candle to this guy. He really can't. It's even though Gene Roddenberry has set a world and has had a good vision of the utopia future, very similar kind of upbringings. Both servicemen, both military men, and both went into television and to try to show an optimistic future, but both in two different ways. Where Gene Roddenberry decided to do it is by putting humanity as the amazing thing it could be. Rod showed humanity as the thing it shouldn't be, which I think is an interesting parallel.
This one's for Dan and Nietzsche. I think the destiny of all men is not to sit in the rubble of their own making, but to reach out for an ultimate perfection which is to be had. At the moment it's a dream, but as of the moment we clasp hands with our neighbor, we build the first span to bridge the gap between young and old. At this hour it's a wish, but we have it within our power to make it a reality. If you want to prove that God is not dead, first prove that man is alive.
Oh, that's good.
Here's another great example of how he values the blue collar worker. In both of the examples we've heard so far, referring to them. So we've got building a span, a bridge builder. We've got the taxi cab drivers and everybody who would be out there working along their fellow man. He's interesting, the references to the power being in each of these individuals to play a part in society. Some might call that a specific name, but it's what we're built on, bootstraps and pulling ourselves up. I want to talk a little bit about well, you know what, Stars, it looks like you have something to say. Let me throw it to you first because I got to collect my
You look
thoughts.
like you have something to say. Do you? So I actually do, because we were going to talk about Gene Roddenberry, and here's the thing: Gene was an incredibly flawed individual. Depending on how flawed, there's stories coming out every day. But here's ultimately the thing, and it's when Star Trek decided to do its take on Gene Roddenberry, it was Zefram Cochrane. They didn't really do it in the original episode. It was in First Contact. That's Gene Roddenberry, but even that version is sanitized from what we have been hearing about behind the news.
Just to qualify on this point, we are specifically talking about his handling of women. He was a horn dog by all fair, but he was a big proponent for racial equality. There was a lot of good about him, but we do talk about his power struggle, his power trips, and his slight misogyny.
But what I want to talk about is his commercialism. Because there's a great quote I've got here from Rod, and I want to compare and contrast the two. So I want you to think about Zefram Cochrane believing that warp drive would allow him to retire to a desert island full of beautiful naked women, and how that's not exactly a million miles away from what Gene Roddenberry would have wanted. About him writing lyrics for the Star Trek theme song that would never be used just so he could claim a royalty thing. The man was interested in money, right? think we can agree with that. And there's no law against making money.
Could you just imagine Rod Serling sitting in the background going, Twilight Zone, Twilight Zone, Twilight Zone?
I know, he's got a voice good enough I could hear it.
Yeah.
But it's like Gene Roddenberry wrote for money, right? And it's like, guess what? There's nothing wrong with that. Everyone does. But I found this quote from Rod Serling, and I feel like you guys need to hear it. From a writing point of view, radio ate up ideas that might have put food on the table for weeks at a time at a future freelancing date. The minute you tie yourself down to a radio or TV station, you write around the clock. You rip out ideas, many of them irreplaceable. They go on and consequently can never go on again, and you've sold them for $50 a week. You can't afford to give away ideas. They're too damn hard to come by. If I had to do over, I wouldn't staff write at all. I'd find some other way to support myself while getting a start as a writer. And I kind of saw that because in the interview, he mentions that being a staff writer was a particularly dreamless occupation. And I was like, this man is so Twilight Zone, he can't stop himself from writing a monologue while he's in the middle of a goddamn interview. I love it. But it's like, he really does place such an emphasis and a value on a good idea. And it, like, all of that was really kind of in stark illumination by the episode we just watched.
How can you put out a meaningful drama when every 15 minutes proceedings are interrupted by 12 dancing rabbits with toilet paper? No dramatic art form should be dictated and controlled by men whose training and instincts are cut from an entirely different cloth. The fact remains that these gentlemen sell consumer goods, not an art form.
Literally a man after my own heart. He hate adverts. He would be the first person to put @uBlock on his web browser, wouldn't he?
Yeah, there's a great bit in the interview actually where like they asked for a line to be cut about gas chambers because one of the sponsors that week was going to be for ovens, and it's like he talks about it. I'm like, you're being the most sarcastic little motherfucker right now, aren't you? You can hear it in his voice. You can see it in the way he's talking about it. It's very understated, sarcastic wit, and it's like. He's playing it nice because he's on an interview, but you can tell he hates that commercialistic streak, even as he realizes it's part and parcel of what he's doing. But I feel like he very much was more interested in the ideas and the artistic integrity of what he was doing than about making money, which obviously it behooves him to do that. That's a great self-mythologization, but it seems to kind of have been also the truth of what he did.
I just
For example, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. I'd just like to say, in one of the episodes you're going to watch, because like we've done our background. I think all of us didn't know much about Rod Serling, so we kind of did a view after. We think we did the first couple of episodes. I think in episode 2 or 1 or 2, which hopefully you're about to watch. I even say like, I don't know who Rod Serling is. He might be a piece of shit for all I know, but I'm very thankful after doing a lot of research to check that he's also done like anti-war activism and racial equality. So it's like he is actually reading a genuinely cool person, and that's so nice to hear of someone from the 50s, 60s being kind of awesome, like a little, almost like a role model in a way. Like he's really cool. But anyway, sorry, Otto, go on.
Well, since Stars brought it up, for example, on Playhouse 90, not a year ago, a lovely show called Judgment at Nuremberg. I think one of the most competently done and artistically done pieces that 90's done all year. In it, mention is made of gas chambers, and the line was deleted, cut off the soundtrack. It mattered little to these guys that the gas involved in concentration camps was cyanide, which bore no resemblance to the gas used in stoves. It was cut because they did not want that awful association between what was the horror and misery of Nazi Germany with the nice, chrome, wonderfully antiseptically clean, beautiful kitchen appliances that they were selling. This is an example of sponsor interference which is so beyond logic and so beyond taste. This I rebel against.
Kind of reminds
See,
me.
like that's how you tell someone to go fuck themselves in the most eloquent manner. It's beautiful.
Oh, I gotta break character. If Rod ever wanted to be a wrestler, he would cut the greatest promos of all time.
He
Now,
do
here's
have
a
a
little
cigarette in
move.
his hand. Like, yeah, exactly.
Here's a little move from the back days. You might remember this one from my Academy Award-winning time on the ropes. Little thinker, a piece of Go on, Dan. You've been silent. Talk to me some more about
so I want
Serling.
to talk a little bit more about censorship because that's one of his largest battles. And so I wonder, if his fights, if your fights during Twilight Zone had paid dividends for your later work, like Night Gallery, and if you were given more creative longitude, I'll say, because you have paid it forward to yourself, or have things really relaxed later on. Any more thoughts on censorship you have?
a racial theme, for example, a show I did for the Steel Hour named Noon on Doomsday, which told the aftermath of the alleged kidnapping in Missouri of the Till Boy, the young Chicago Negro. I wrote the script using black and white initially, then it was changed to suggest an unnamed foreigner. Then the locale was changed from the South to New England, and I'm convinced they'd have gone all the way up to Alaska or the North Pole using Eskimos as a possible minority, except I suppose the costume problem was of sufficient severity to not attempt it.
So that Till reference, like, oh boy, that's a rough case to bring up. You guys are familiar with that, I imagine.
I am not.
Emmett Till, sure.
Emmett Till, yeah, that's a rough one. And the fact that he was clearly angry about that at the time. Well,
I'm not completely familiar with it. I'm sure some of the viewers are not, so...
let me bring up the details. In fact, the only reason I knew about it was because it was referenced as in Star Trek. Oddly enough, there was going to be a USS Emmett Till, which I believe was going to be captained by one of the main characters. Emmett Louis Till was a African American boy who was abducted, tortured, and lynched in Mississippi in 1955 at the age of 14. After being accused of offending a white woman, Carolyn Bryant, in her family's grocery store. The brutality of his murder and the acquittal of his killers drew attention to the long history of violent persecution of African Americans in the United States. He posthumously became an icon of the civil rights movement. And don't look up the details unless you have a particularly strong stomach, because it is a grisly case.
No thanks.
It's hardly a revelation to me that the young people in this country take a dim view of our current uptightness when it comes to street riding. They believe, and I think quite properly, that on the scale of misbehavior, the black man who takes a torch to a building or breaks a window to loot and does so out of passion is less a criminal than the white man who puts his torch to human beings and does so with a cold, calculated, predatory, pre-planned blueprint of destruction.
I didn't mince words.
Yeah.
Do we feel like Rod is in the room with us right now?
Yeah.
A little bit. The only way it could be more authentic is if you had the cigarette in your hand, but guess what? You're doing a pretty good job.
Indeed. And that's Rod Serling. That's kind of what we thought of. He's a recent discovery for all of us, and quite a good one, a refreshingly nice one. Also, have you got something? Oh, sorry. Also, he's not here. He couldn't make it. Mr. Serling, just any notes you want to leave us on?
Hollywood is a great place to live if you're a grapefruit.
And on that note, please go and watch our Twilight Zone reviews. Watch the episodes and then watch our review. You will not regret watching the episodes, if anything else. It's certainly eye-opening for all of us. So we will see you.
They are, as Rod Serling would say, very good half-hour films, very tightly produced, very well made.
Yeah. Get out here.
They are.